The jungle was breathing. Smoke rose from the green mountains of Jamaica like whispers from the earth itself. And somewhere deep inside that fog, a single drum began to beat. Slow, heavy, ancient. Boom, boom, boom. Each beat was a warning to the British soldiers marching through the forest. They didn't know it yet, but they had just stepped into the territory of the Maroons, the runaway slaves who built their own mountain kingdom and would rather die than kneel again. The island of Chains in the early 1700s. Jamaica was one of Britain's richest colonies, a glittering jewel dripping with sugar, gold, and blood. Thousands of African men and women were enslaved on the island's plantations, forced to work under the brutal Caribbean sun. They were beaten, branded, and broken, or at least, the British thought they were. But deep in Jamaica's rugged interior, beyond the cane fields, beyond the reach of the whip, something wild and defiant was rising. In those mountains, runaway slaves carved out hidden villages. They were called Maroons from the Spanish word cimarron, meaning wild or untamed. They hunted, farmed, and built strongholds in places where no British soldier dared to go. Every trail was a trap. Every echo was a signal. Every shadow could hide a fighter. They weren't just survivors. They were warriors of freedom. And soon they would become legends. The birth of the Maroon nations long before the British came, the Spanish ruled Jamaica. When the British invaded in 1655, enslaved Africans used the chaos to escape into the hills. Some were warriors from West Africa, the Akan, the Ashanti, the Fante, people who had once commanded armies. They brought with them not only strength but knowledge, of war, of unity, of spirit. Over decades, these escaped Africans formed tight-knit communities, the Windward Maroons in the east and the Leeward Maroons in the west. They created their own governments, laws, and networks of spies. They spoke African tongues mixed with English and Spanish. They trained every child to fight. They were not a scattered group of rebels. They were a nation. Each Maroon village had its own leader, but one name echoed louder than all others: Queen Nanny of the Maroons. The woman who defied an empire. Legends say she came from Ghana, priestess of the Ashanti people, fierce and wise. Some say she was once enslaved on a plantation before she escaped to the Blue Mountains. There she gathered her people and built Nanny Town, a fortress hidden so deep in the jungle that British soldiers could march for days and never find it. Nanny wasn't just a leader, she was a symbol. She taught her people to believe that freedom was their birthright. At night, she performed rituals, called on the spirits of the ancestors, and filled her warriors with courage. The Maroons believed Nanny had powers, that she could catch bullets with her hands or call the wind to confuse the enemy. Whether myth or truth, one thing was certain: her people never lost faith in her. The first sparks of war, by the early 1700s, British plantation owners were terrified. Slaves were running away more often, and the Maroons were helping them. Every runaway that reached the mountains meant one more soldier in the Maroon ranks, and one less worker on the plantations. So the British made a decision: the Maroons must be crushed. In 1728, the governor of Jamaica sent hundreds of British troops and local militias into the hills. They carried muskets, cannons, and hunting dogs trained to kill. They believed it would be a simple campaign, but the mountains had their own laws. The British soldiers soon found themselves in a nightmare. Invisible enemies struck from behind trees, rocks, and vines. Muskets fired from nowhere. Arrows hissed from the mist. And every time the British thought they had surrounded the Maroons, the jungle swallowed them whole. The Maroons fought like ghosts, swift, silent, and ruthless. They used guerrilla tactics long before the term existed. They didn't meet the enemy head-on. They let the enemy come to them. The jungle that fought back, the forests of Jamaica, became a living weapon. Maroons used the terrain as if it were an ally, setting traps in ravines, disguising paths, and ambushing patrols at night. They moved like smoke and struck like lightning. Every raid sent a message: we are still here. We will not kneel. British reports spoke of phantom warriors who appeared out of nowhere and vanished into trees. Soldiers began to desert, terrified of the endless drumbeats that echoed through the fog. Plantation owners demanded reinforcements, but the war was no longer in their hands. It was in the hands of the mountain ghosts. Nanny's vision. One night, as the moon bled silver across the hills, Nanny gathered her warriors. She looked out over the valley below, the plantations glowing faintly under the night sky. The wind carried the faint smell of sugar and smoke. "They think we are slaves," she said, her voice steady and low. "They do not see that we are the storm." Her words spread through the camps like wildfire. Every warrior, every mother, every child of Nanny Town knew what was coming. The British would return, stronger, angrier, more desperate. And when they did, the Maroons would be ready. The gathering storm for the next few years, the Maroons grew bolder. They raided plantations, freed captives, and burned crops meant for export. Each victory sent shockwaves through the island. The British tried diplomacy. It failed. They tried terror. It failed. They sent spies. None returned. By 1730, the Maroon Wars had become a full-blown nightmare for the colonial army. The governor called it the most costly and humiliating conflict the Crown has ever faced in the Caribbean. But for the Maroons, it wasn't just a war. It was a prophecy. The fight their ancestors had promised them they would win. The drums echoed again that night, louder than before. From one mountain to another, the signal spread. A storm was coming. In the dark, Nanny raised her hand and whispered a single word: freedom. And the jungle answered her call. The drums had not stopped for 3 nights. Their echo rolled like thunder through the valleys, a war cry disguised as rhythm. Every beat meant something. To the British soldiers, it was chaos. To the Maroons, it was language. And in that language, one message pulsed through every hidden camp. They are coming. The British retaliation by 1730. The British colonial government had finally realized that the Maroons were not mere runaway slaves. They were a trained army, disciplined, cunning, and protected by the land itself. So the governor of Jamaica unleashed his fury. Regiments of redcoats, local militia, and hired mercenaries marched into the mountains armed with muskets, bayonets, cannons, and most chilling of all, packs of hunting dogs imported from Cuba, trained to track human scent. Their plan was simple: burn every village, kill every rebel, end the rebellion before it spread to the plantations. But the British didn't understand one thing. They weren't the hunters anymore. Into the green hell, the deeper they went, the stranger the world became. The air was thick, the ground slick with mud and roots. The forest seemed alive, whispering, watching, waiting. At night, soldiers saw lights flickering between the trees, as if eyes glowed in the dark. Then came the sounds: footsteps, whispers, the low hum of drums far away but everywhere. One officer wrote in his journal, "We march through hell itself. Every leaf hides an enemy. Every sound mocks us." And then the attacks began. Guerrilla warfare. Like no other, the Maroons didn't fight in open fields. They owned the shadows. They used camouflage made from leaves and mud, blending into the jungle until even the moonlight couldn't find them. When the British camp settled for the night, that's when they struck. A single arrow would slice through the dark. A musket would flash from a tree. Then a silence. Moments later, chaos. Soldiers would wake to find their ammunition stolen, their supplies burned, and their wounded gone. Because the Maroons would drag them into the jungle not to kill immediately, but to question, to learn. The Maroons studied their enemies like hunters studying prey. The Phantom Queen, in the heart of the mountains, Queen Nanny commanded her people with the precision of a general and the heart of a mother. By day she planned, by night she prayed, to the ancestors, to the spirits of the land. Her warriors said they saw her standing at the edge of cliffs, arms raised to the moon, chanting in the old Ashanti tongue. They said the forest answered her, wind rising, trees trembling. When the British advanced, fog would roll down the slopes, thick and sudden. Muskets jammed, gunpowder went damp, compasses failed. The soldiers believed the jungle itself had turned against them. But it wasn't magic. It was strategy. Nanny and her lieutenants knew the mountains better than any map could show. They used trails invisible to outsiders, hidden valleys, and ambush points built over generations. Every path the British took was one the Maroons had already walked. The Battle of the Blood River one morning. After weeks of silence, a column of British troops found a narrow ravine with a trickle of water, a perfect place to rest. They thought they were safe, but as they filled their canteens, the forest exploded. Maroons poured down from the cliffs, screaming war cries that shattered the air. Arrows and bullets rained down. The water turned red, a river of blood. Within minutes, the British formation collapsed. The survivors tried to flee, but the trails behind them were blocked with fallen trees and traps, sharpened bamboo hidden in the mud. That day, more than half the regiment never made it out. The survivors would later call it the day the hills ate men. The British counter-move humiliated and bleeding. The British command changed tactics. If they couldn't beat the Maroons in the jungle, they would starve them out. They burned crops, poisoned water supplies, and captured families suspected of helping the rebels. They offered rewards for Nanny's head, dead or alive. But even under hunger and loss, the Maroons refused to break. They moved deeper into the interior, building secret camps where no map reached. There they trained children as runners, women as scouts, and elders as advisors. Freedom was no longer a dream. It was their religion. The ghost soldiers. British soldiers began whispering about shadow men, warriors who could vanish at will. They said the Maroons used mirrors to reflect sunlight and blind enemies, horns to mimic animal sounds as signals, and leaves soaked in herbs to mask their scent from dogs. And in the center of this invisible war was Nanny's drum, carved from a hollowed tree. Its surface stretched with goatskin, painted with red clay and ash. Every time it beat, hearts trembled. Boom, boom, boom. The sound meant the ancestors were watching. It meant someone somewhere was about to fall, the price of defiance, but even heroes bleed. One night, a small Maroon camp was discovered. The British ambushed it with torches and dogs. Dozens were killed, including children. The screams echoed through the hills and reached Nanny herself. The next day, she stood before her warriors, silent, her face painted black for mourning. She didn't weep. She didn't speak for hours. Then she said softly, "They burn our homes to make us fear them. But they forget we have no home but freedom." And with that, she declared vengeance. The night of smoke and rain, a week later, a British outpost at the foot of the mountains saw fire, dozens of them, creeping through the fog like red eyes. Then the drums began again. The Maroons attacked with fury, using burning arrows and traps soaked in oil. Rain poured, lightning struck, and amid the storm, warriors leapt from the trees like spirits. It was chaos, fire, smoke, screams. And when dawn came, nothing remained but ash. The message was clear. The Maroons could not be conquered. Not by gun, not by hunger, not by empire. The turning point, the governor of Jamaica sent one last message to London. We are fighting a war that cannot be won. The mountains themselves defend these people. Even the British began to question the cost. Dozens of officers dead, hundreds of soldiers lost, thousands of pounds spent, and yet the Maroons only grew stronger. Meanwhile, rumors spread through the plantations. The Maroons are coming. They are freeing our brothers. And across Jamaica, enslaved people began to look toward the mountains, not with fear, but hope. The calm before the storm. The air in the Blue Mountains was heavy that morning. Mist curled like ghosts between the trees. Every leaf trembled, not from wind, but from the weight of silence. Deep within the jungle fortress of Nanny Town, warriors sharpened blades, checked muskets, and prepared for war. But their leader, Queen Nanny, stood still on a rock overlooking the valley, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She had seen the smoke, British smoke, rising from the western ridge. It meant one thing: the enemy was coming. Behind her, hundreds of Maroon men and women stood ready, hunters, farmers, mothers, even children who had learned to fight. Each one carried not just a weapon, but generations of rage and hope. Nanny turned to them and said, "They think the mountains belong to them, but the mountain has already chosen her people." The British Plan Governor Hunter of Jamaica had lost patience. After years of failed expeditions, he ordered the largest campaign yet. Hundreds of soldiers, local militias, and trackers sworn to find and destroy Nanny Town once and for all. They came armed with new muskets, cannons, and iron determination. They believed this was the final battle, the one that would break the back of the Maroon resistance. But what they didn't know was that the Maroons were waiting. They had turned every trail into a trap, every tree into a shield, every bird call into a signal. And at the center of it all was Nanny, unshaken, unbroken, and ready. The March of Iron. The British soldiers moved through the forest in tight formations, cutting through vines, hacking through roots. Dripping with sweat, their boots sinking into the mud, they pushed forward with dogs barking and torches flickering. Then the jungle went quiet. The dogs began to whine. A strange rhythm echoed through the hills. Boom, 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 one soldier whispered. That's her, the Witch Queen. Then an arrow whistled. A man fell. Another scream. The forest exploded. The British line broke apart under sudden fire. Muskets flashing from behind trees, spears flying through fog. The air filled with smoke and confusion. The Maroons struck fast, vanishing into the mist before the soldiers could even aim. Every shadow was an enemy. Every heartbeat, a warning. The trap of the hidden pass, the British commander, furious and desperate, ordered a direct advance up the mountain trail, a narrow gorge known as the Devil's Pass. Unknown to them, the Maroons had spent weeks preparing it, logs rigged with vines, pits filled with spikes, and ambush points in the cliffs above. When the first British troops entered the gorge, the ground shook. Logs crashed down from above, crushing men and blocking escape routes. Then came the arrows, hundreds of them darkening the sky. Trapped and panicking, the soldiers tried to retreat, but the rear was blocked. The screams of men and horses echoed through the mountains. By the time the smoke cleared, the British had lost dozens, their supplies, ammunition, and morale gone with them. It was supposed to be an easy victory. Instead, it became a massacre. The spirit of Nanny, that night as the Maroons celebrated in silence, Nanny sat by a fire, eyes closed. She held a small bowl of ash taken from the battlefield. Beside her, her warriors whispered prayers in the old language. They said Nanny could speak to the spirits of the dead, and that those spirits warned her when danger approached. Whether magic or instinct, she always seemed to know the enemy's next move. In one vision, she saw a traitor, a man who would soon betray them. She didn't speak it aloud, but the warning burned in her heart. The next dawn, she gathered her captains. "The British are not done," she said. "They will come again harder, but they forget we fight for the living and the dead." The betrayal a week later. Her vision came true. One of the Maroon scouts, a young man desperate for gold and mercy, slipped into the British camp and offered to lead them to Nanny Town. In return, he asked for freedom and land. The British agreed instantly. That very night, guided by the traitor, a column of redcoats crept through the jungle in silence. When dawn broke, they reached the edge of the cliffs overlooking Nanny Town. From there, they could see smoke rising from campfires, hear the faint beat of drums. The British commander smiled. "At last," he said. "The witch's nest." The siege of Nanny Town cannon fire shattered the morning. Shells exploded across the village, tearing through huts and scattering debris. Men and women screamed, running for cover as fire spread through the thatched roofs. But even in chaos, the Maroons did not break. They rallied, taking up positions behind rocks and fallen trees, firing back with deadly precision. From the cliffs, the British fired volley after volley, but the fog thickened again, choking their aim. Some swore they saw figures in the mist, silhouettes moving faster than human eyes could track. And above it all, Nanny's drum began to beat again. Boom, boom, boom. Her warriors answered with shouts, charging through smoke and fire. The battle turned into chaos. Close combat, knives against bayonets, fists against rifles. Blood mixed with rain as thunder rolled through the mountains. The fall and the miracle. By midday, the British breached the outer defenses. The Maroons were outnumbered and cornered. Nanny herself was hit, a musket ball grazing her shoulder, but she refused to fall. She climbed the stone ridge above the town, blood dripping down her arm, and raised her hand. In it, she held a silver horn, a sacred relic said to summon the ancestors. When she blew it, the sound echoed for miles, a deep, haunting call that seemed to shake the sky. And then something happened the soldiers could not explain. A sudden landslide thundered down the slope, crushing the front lines of the British attack. Hundreds of troops were buried under rock and earth. The survivors fled, leaving behind weapons and wounded. The British never knew if it was coincidence, fate, or Nanny's power. But for the Maroons, it was a miracle, a sign that the spirits of Africa still walked beside them. Aftermath. When the smoke cleared, Nanny Town was in ruins, but the people still stood. They gathered their dead, buried them beneath the oldest tree, and swore an oath. No British foot will ever own this mountain again. Word of the victory spread like fire across Jamaica. In the plantations, enslaved workers whispered Nanny's name with reverence. To them, she wasn't just a rebel, she was a goddess of freedom. The British, humiliated again, withdrew to regroup. But this time, even they began to fear that defeating the Maroons might be impossible. The legend grows in the months that followed. British scouts reported seeing strange fires burning on the cliffs at night. Lights that moved in patterns, like signals. Some soldiers claimed to hear drums even when there were no Maroons nearby. Others said they saw a woman in white standing on the ridge watching them, and when they fired, she vanished. Governor Hunter dismissed the stories as native superstition, but deep down, even he knew. The Maroons were winning something far greater than a war. They were winning fear, the siege of Nanny Town. The mountains slept that night, but only for a moment. Beneath the ashes, new fires glowed. The Maroons had survived again, and in survival was victory. Ashes and silence, the war drums had stopped. For the first time in years, the mountains of Jamaica were silent, too silent. Smoke drifted lazily from the ruins of Nanny Town. The forest that had once echoed with battle cries now whispered only with wind and rain. The Maroons had won the battle, but the cost had been steep. Half their warriors were dead or wounded. Food was scarce, ammunition almost gone, and Queen Nanny, their heart and fire, had vanished into the fog after the final battle. Some said she went to the sacred caves to speak with the ancestors. Others swore she died defending her people. But every Maroon knew one truth. Nanny's spirit was still watching. The British regrouped down below in the colonial capital of Spanish Town. The British were broken and bitter. Years of war had drained their coffers and morale. Thousands of pounds spent, hundreds of soldiers lost, and still, the mountains remained unconquered. Governor Hunter, humiliated and desperate, finally admitted what no British official ever wanted to say out loud: "We cannot destroy them. We must deal with them." And so the empire that ruled half the world was forced to do the unthinkable: negotiate peace with escaped slaves. The white flags in the jungle, the first meeting between British officers and Maroon envoys took place in the foothills near Trelawney. No one trusted the other. The British came in polished uniforms, their muskets gleaming. The Maroons appeared from the trees, silent, armed, their eyes sharp and unblinking. At the front of the Maroon line stood Captain Cudjoe, Nanny's brother, a massive man with scars across his chest and the calm of someone who had seen too much death. A British colonel extended his hand. Cudjoe didn't take it. "We don't make peace with chains," he said coldly. "We make peace with equals." The colonel forced a smile. "Then let us speak as equals." And for the first time, under the watch of the Caribbean sun, rebels and empire sat across the same table. The Treaty of 1739, the talks lasted for days. The British promised land, freedom, and recognition in exchange for an end to hostilities. The Maroons demanded independence, their own territory, their own laws, their own future. Finally, in 1739, the Treaty of Peace was signed. It was simple yet revolutionary. The Maroons would remain free. Their lands, in Trelawney, Accompong, and Moortown, would be recognized as sovereign. The British would stop sending troops into the mountains, and in return, the Maroons would no longer raid plantations. The war was over, at least on paper. The price of peace. When Cudjoe returned to his people with the treaty, not everyone celebrated. Some wept with relief, others glared in silence. To many, the treaty felt like a wound disguised as victory, because buried within its words was a dark condition, one that would divide the Maroons for generations. The Maroons were required to return any future runaway slaves to the British authorities. It was a demand the Empire insisted. And one Cudjoe, exhausted by war, had been forced to accept. When he announced it to the people, a heavy silence fell. A young warrior shouted, "So we are free, but others must stay in chains?" No one answered. The wind carried only the echo of Nanny's drum, somewhere far away. Life after war, despite the tension, the Maroons rebuilt. Villages flourished again, new homes, farms, schools. Children who had grown up in battle now learned to live in peace. The mountains, once filled with smoke and screams, hummed again with laughter and song. But beneath the calm, an unease lingered. Some Maroons obeyed the treaty strictly. Others, in secret, still sheltered runaway slaves, hiding them in caves and forests before smuggling them to freedom. These quiet rebellions kept Nanny's spirit alive, the fire that no treaty could extinguish. The return of the Queen, then. One night, when the moon was full and the air thick with rain, a figure appeared at the edge of Moortown. She was old, her back slightly bent, her hair wrapped in red cloth. But her eyes, as sharp as blades, hadn't aged a day. The guards froze. "Who are you?" One whispered. She smiled. "You know who I am." It was Nanny, or so the legends said. Some claimed she had lived alone in the mountains since the last battle, guided only by the spirits. Others said she had died and returned, walking between worlds to remind her people who they were. That night, she spoke to the gathered Maroons by firelight. "The British call this peace," she said. "But peace without justice is only silence before the next storm." Her words burned deep. And from that day, Nanny's followers swore they would never betray the enslaved again, no matter what the treaty demanded. The tension builds. For a few years, the uneasy peace held. The British kept their distance, rebuilding their plantations. The Maroons patrolled their borders, guarding freedom like a sacred flame. But every runaway slave who appeared in the hills was a spark, one that threatened to ignite the fire all over again. Reports reached the governor. Maroons are hiding fugitives. Maroons are training new warriors. Maroons still follow the Witch Queen's spirit. And in London, whispers spread that Jamaica's peace might be an illusion. The empire had built a fragile bridge, and it was beginning to crack. A new generation rises years past. Cudjoe grew older, weary from both war and politics. But among the younger Maroons, a new spirit stirred. Proud, restless, and ready. They were the children of fighters, born in freedom, but still carrying the scars of their parents' battles. They wanted more than peace. They wanted sovereignty. One of them, a fiery leader named Cudjoe, once shouted in a council meeting, "We fought the British once. We can do it again if we must." The elders warned him of bloodshed. But deep down they knew he wasn't wrong. The Maroons had learned too well. Peace made under empire was never truly peace. Echoes of the drum at night. From the hills, villagers still heard the drums, slow and steady. Some said they were just echoes of old war signals. Others believed it was Nanny herself, reminding them that freedom demanded vigilance. Boom, boom, boom. A heartbeat in the earth. A warning in the wind. Even after decades, the British could not silence that sound. Because the Maroons had proven something the empire would never forget. You can conquer land, but never the spirit that defends it. Echoes in the mountains, the war was over. The treaties were signed. The mountains of Jamaica breathed again. But they never forgot. Each morning when the fog rolled through the valleys, the villagers said it was the ancestors walking among them. Every gust of wind that whistled through the trees carried the same rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. The heartbeat of the Maroon drums. They were no longer slaves. They were no longer fugitives. They were a nation within a nation. A people born from rebellion, carved from fire. But freedom, they knew, was not something you win once. It's something you defend. Every single day. The new dawn in Moortown, children played beside the river, their laughter echoing where once the cries of war had rung. Elders sat beneath the ancient trees, passing down stories of Queen Nanny, Captain Cudjoe, and the long years of struggle. Never forget, the elders would say. Freedom came not from kindness, but from courage. The British governors, watching from their colonial mansions, wrote flattering letters back to London. The Maroons are peaceful now. They are our allies, but the truth in the hills was different. The Maroons had made peace, yes, but not submission. They still ruled their own councils. They still refused British soldiers in their lands. And every night, they still sang the songs that had guided them through blood and fire. Nanny's spirit lives years after the treaty, Stories began to spread. Stories too strange for the British to explain. Hunters in the Blue Mountains swore they saw a woman dressed in red, standing on the edge of the cliffs at sunrise. When they called out, she vanished into mist. Her footprints led nowhere. The Maroons knew who it was. It was Nanny, the mother of the rebellion. Still watching, still protecting. In Moortown, they built a shrine in her honor, a place of drumming, herbs, and ancestral fire. Even the skeptical British soldiers who passed by the village admitted that something powerful lingered there. Something not even Empire could understand. And every time a new child was born, the mothers whispered the same words over them. "You are Nanny's blood." Never bow to chains, the return of shadows, but peace was fragile. Decades after the first treaty, the British once again began expanding their plantations, hungry for more land and labor. They wanted total control of Jamaica, every inch. And in the far western hills of Trelawney Town, the younger generation of Maroons grew restless. They remembered the promises, the betrayals, the humiliation of being forced to return runaway slaves. To them, the treaty was a collar around their necks. A warrior named Montague James rose to lead them, bold, intelligent, and unafraid. He declared, "We are not the Empire's servants. We are the Empire's warning." By 1795, tensions erupted again. The Second Maroon War began, smaller but just as fierce. For months, the Maroons fought British troops, ambushing patrols, burning outposts, vanishing into the mist like ghosts. Once again, the British underestimated them. Once again, the island trembled, the last betrayal. But this time, the Empire had learned from its wounds. They didn't just fight with guns. They fought with words, lies, and hunger. British officers promised peace, offered food, and swore friendship, then captured the Maroons when they laid down their arms. The survivors were shackled, not as slaves, but as rebels. Hundreds were exiled to Nova Scotia, then shipped again to Sierra Leone. Thousands of miles from the land their ancestors had died to free. The mountains fell silent once more. But in that silence, the British made their gravest mistake, because when they scattered the Maroons, they also scattered the flame, a flame that would ignite across the Atlantic. The fire spreads from Jamaica to Haiti, from Brazil to America. Whispers of the Maroons' defiance traveled like sparks in dry grass. In Saint-Domingue, a slave named Toussaint Louverture learned of Nanny's rebellion and took inspiration. In South America, Zumbi of Palmares was remembered as a brother in the same struggle. In the plantations of the Carolinas and Suriname, enslaved people told their children stories of a people who had defeated the Empire and lived free in the mountains. The Maroons had done more than fight for Jamaica. They had taught the world what resistance looked like, the symbol of freedom generations later. When Jamaica finally won independence in 1962, the name of Nanny of the Maroons returned to the nation's lips. Historians debated her existence. But the people didn't care about books. They cared about spirit. They knew who she was. They knew what she stood for. In 1975, the Jamaican government declared Queen Nanny a national hero. Her face was printed on the $500 bill. Her story taught in schools. Her courage celebrated in songs. But for the Maroons, she had never been just a hero. She was the heartbeat of the hills, the voice that still whispered through the bamboo leaves. Freedom is not given, 'tis taken. Ancestral fire, even today in Moortown. The descendants of those mountain warriors still gather every October for the Maroon Festival. They beat drums, light torches, and dance beneath the moon, calling on the spirits of their ancestors. When the fire crackles, the old ones say it's Nanny listening. When thunder rolls through the valley, they say it's Cudjoe's war horn echoing across time. And when children laugh beside the river, free and fearless, that is the true victory, the one the British could never erase, eternal freedom. The Maroon Wars were not just about guns and treaties. They were about memory, identity, and the eternal refusal to kneel. They proved that freedom could bloom even in chains, that a people torn from Africa could build a nation in the heart of the Caribbean jungle, that the human spirit, once awakened, can never again be enslaved. Their story is not a tale of the past. It is a message to the present. Whenever power demands your obedience, Remember Nanny's drum. Whenever the world says your freedom must wait, remember Cudjoe's scars. Whenever fear tells you to stay silent, remember the mountains that roared no. The legend lives on, centuries have passed. Empires have fallen, but in the forests of Jamaica, if you listen closely, you can still hear it. A faint rhythm carried by the wind. A drumbeat older than memory. A whisper from the mountains that once shook the British Empire to its knees. Boom, boom, boom. We are still free.